He lives in New York. He works on Around the Horn. He covers basketball for The Athletic. And Frank joins us now. Good morning, Frank.
Dan, how are you? I tend to lash out at everybody, so I'm probably in the Russell Westbrook category.
All right, before I get to James Dolan, the incident last night, what do you make of that? What's the commissioner do?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one for him because, you had the fight last night with Serge Ibaka and Marquise Chris, but I would think that this is probably on top of his desk this morning. I think for Russell Westbrook, it's like a he said. We don't exactly know what happened, but if Russell Westbrook feels that that's what this gentleman said, I could see why he would be angry about it. I think he would have helped his case a little bit if he didn't threaten the wife in this one.
Yeah.
I could see you getting mad and maybe alerting security to it, but it seems like the person who said something might have a history according to maybe some of the social media stuff, and then Russell Westbrook has gotten into it a couple of times with what's gone on in Utah. If you remember, he walked off the court last year at the end of that playoff game, which ended with a bit of controversy because it looked like Paul George might have been fouled shooting a three. Nothing was called, and before you knew it, he was walking. The series was over, and as Westbrook was walking off the court, someone had a cell phone camera was kind of sticking in his face, and he slapped at the guy's hand.
Yeah.
So I think this all kind of goes into it. I just think that Russell, in that case, I think if he had to do it all over again, it's one thing to get mad at the guy in this case, but to basically be threatening his wife too. I think that's where he didn't help himself.
Yeah, I mentioned this fan had taken down his social media. Seton checked it a couple of minutes ago, and it's back up. So I'm not quite sure what it is, but I think we should be vetting out both sides here, understanding what Russell Westbrook heard, but also where's this fan coming from? And judging from social media, which he says is now fake news, he had an agenda that there's definitely a profile here of this guy. So before we cast aspersions with Russell Westbrook, I got to look at both sides here. Yeah, but I think
Absolutely.
The commissioner's going to have to come down on Russell Westbrook. He's going to have to. Well,
and come on, Dan, we know that this stuff used to go on all the time, interactions between players and fans. That Charles Barkley, I'm sure, has gotten into it a bunch of times. Same thing with even Reggie Miller. It's just that everyone in the crowd wasn't there with the cell phone camera recording everything. And I think that probably played into it a little bit because I think the fans, and you and I, we've been to Utah, we've been there for games. The fans there are tough. Utah, Indiana, Detroit, they have some really tough fans who aren't afraid to say things to players. And I think in this case, the people sitting near the bench, I think they wanted to get under Russell Westbrook's skin because it had happened before, and there were people recording it, obviously, as he kind of went off on this guy.
Your most recent article after Jim Dolan's latest confrontation at the Garden, Charles Oakley calls for the commissioner to step in. I watched Around the Horn with your comments about Dolan that basically don't be so sensitive with something like this. He's heard this before, but he did ban a fan a couple of years ago for basically the same thing. What can the commissioner do with the Knicks situation with this owner?
Well, they haven't done anything before. And if you remember, the All-Star game was in New York. It was like 4 or 5 years ago. And right before the All-Star game was here, there was a gentleman who had sent Jim Dolan a letter kind of expressing his disappointment and how things are being run. And Jim Dolan responded to the guy with kind of a nasty letter, accused the guy of probably being an alcoholic. And the guy's son ended up releasing that letter. And when Adam Silver was asked about it, he was kind of like, well, that's just Jim Dolan kind of being, a competitive guy and being feisty. But it's happened on a number of occasions. And for me, if that's you as you're walking off the court and somebody says something to you, there's a chance that you might say something back. But I think you have to put everything in proper perspective here. You are the owner of a franchise that has won one playoff series since 2001. The team currently has 13 wins. You can't sit there and tell me just because, and I get it, he pays the players, he pays his executives, his coaches, everybody makes a lot of money, but that's not just what goes into being a good owner. The fans only care about the results on the court, and there's no arguing the results on the court. They haven't been good since Jim Dolan has been in charge there. And if once in a while a fan's going to yell out, sell the team, I would say this, Dan, I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often at the Garden. I think the fans there are incredibly patient. We know all about years ago when they flew the banner over Giant Stadium about selling the team. It happens all the time in Europe with these soccer teams. When they think the manager isn't any good or the owner, somebody will rent a plane and they'll fly, they'll have like some kind of sign flying over the stadium. I guess luckily for Madison Square Garden, it doesn't have a see-through roof, so Jim Dolan doesn't have to look at stuff like that.
Well, I'm also wondering this in the offseason, Frank, where if they luck into Zion Williamson, you're not going to luck into Kevin Durant and or Kyrie Irving, but why would they want to go into this situation? Everybody wants to be a savior, and, I can be a good guy going to the Knicks, and we make the Knicks relevant here. But I'm just wondering, as a free agent, why would I want, not that it matters, I guess, who the owner is, but in this situation, it feels like it does.
Well, it does in a lot of ways, because I think if you look at a lot of players, but it definitely coaches and executives who have gone there, you can't tell me that being in New York enhanced their legacy, whether or not it was Larry Brown, Phil Jackson, Isaiah Thomas, Carmelo Anthony, Amari Stoudemire, Jason Kidd. Kind of the list goes on and on. The one guy who I think got out of it pretty good was probably Jeremy Lin when he was there, and that was only a short time. What would concern me for guys like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, I think you hit on it. Coming to New York, that could be part of it. Hey, think about what I could do for my legacy if I win. I also think a lot of it could be about stuff off the court, kind of like what LeBron has going on in L.A. And I think sometimes for these guys, if they make moves that really aren't based on basketball first and foremost, and really, if Kevin Durant were to leave the Golden State Warriors, he's in one of the greatest situations you'll be in for an NBA player, in the next maybe 50 years. That's an ideal place. The Celtics are the Celtics. They have the history. They got young players and all this talent. If you go to the Knicks, you're taking a risk, but you also wonder, is there extra motivation? And sometimes that could backfire. I think for LeBron, every move that he's made in his career, to me, was about basketball. The one to the Lakers was basketball, family, and obviously the business part of it, and the basketball has backfired. I don't think there's any question about it.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting offseason. I'm curious, the best team in the East, the team that will come out of the East this year is who?
I still tend to go with Toronto just because I would love to see it be Milwaukee, but that group of players, that team hasn't won a playoff series yet. Now you're asking them to go pretty far. I mean, Kawhi Leonard is the most accomplished postseason player, with the exception of Dwayne Wade, in the Eastern Conference. He's been to the finals twice. He's been a finals MVP, and a lot of the players on that team have been through the playoffs before. They've won playoff series. He's kind of like the difference maker that they haven't had. So essentially what Toronto did was they traded DeMar DeRozan, they moved LeBron James to a different conference, and they added Kawhi Leonard. It was a win-win all the way around. I still tend to go with them just because of the fact that Kawhi Leonard's done it before.
Good to visit with you, Frank. Thanks, as always. We appreciate your time.
Good, Dan. Thanks a lot. Anytime.
That's Frank Isola, The Athletic, and Around the Horn contributor as well.
For more Dan Patrick Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV or download the Dan Patrick Show app.